The congressional hearing room fell silent as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett calmly reached into her portfolio. Across from her, Hollywood legend Denzel Washington sat with a confident posture that had defined his decades-long career. His expression stern after having just delivered a scathing assessment of Crockett's qualifications to serve on the Congressional Arts Committee. Congresswoman Crockett lacks a fundamental understanding of arts funding that makes her unfit to determine the future of programs that nurture America's cultural heritage. Washington had declared moments earlier, his authoritative voice filling the chamber as cameras captured his testimony. The room remained captivated by the acclaimed actor's presence when Crockett looked up from her documents and spoke with measured precision. "Mr. Washington, before we continue, I'd like to play a recording from an interview you gave last year." She pressed the button on the device before her, and Washington's own voice filled the chamber. "Politicians should never judge artistic merit. The people making these decisions in Congress, they've never produced a film, never run a theater company. I wouldn't trust them to decide what deserves funding." Washington's expression transformed from confidence to visible discomfort as his own words contradicted the testimony he had just delivered. The committee members leaned forward. Journalists frantically took notes, and the audience murmured in surprise as they witnessed what would become a pivotal moment in the debate over arts funding in America. What happened next not only changed the entire hearing, but transformed the national conversation about celebrity influence in policy discussions. If you want to see how preparation and evidence can overcome even the most commanding presence, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more moments when substance triumphs over star power. Before this electrifying confrontation, both Denzel Washington and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had traveled distinct paths that led them to this consequential hearing. Denzel Washington, 68, had built an unparalleled legacy in American cinema over 4 decades. With 2 Academy Awards, 3 Golden Globes, and a Tony Award, Washington was more than just a celebrated actor. He had become a cultural institution. His compelling performances in films like Glory, Training Day, and Fences had established him as one of the most respected voices in Hollywood. In recent years, Washington had expanded his influence beyond acting, becoming increasingly vocal about arts funding and education. His Denzel Washington Family Foundation had funded arts programs in underserved communities, and he had leveraged his celebrity to advocate for expanded federal support for cultural initiatives. These efforts had earned him appointments to several prestigious arts boards and made him a natural choice to testify before Congress. "Art transforms lives," Washington often stated in interviews. "It saved me as a young man, and we need to ensure those opportunities exist for future generations." This commitment to arts education had made him a respected voice on cultural policy, with politicians from both parties seeking his endorsement for their initiatives. When the Congressional Arts Committee announced hearings on the reauthorization of the National Endowment for the Arts, Washington had been invited as the lead witness. His star power ensuring media coverage that might otherwise be absent for discussions of federal arts policy. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, 43, represented a different kind of American success story. After graduating with honors from the University of Houston Law Center, she had built her reputation as a civil rights attorney before entering politics. Elected to Congress in 2022, Crockett had been assigned to several committees, including the recently formed Arts, Entertainment, and Sports Committee. What many observers of congressional hearings didn't realize was that before law school, Crockett had earned a bachelor's degree in business administration with a minor in fine arts. During college, she had managed a community theater and later served on the board of a regional arts organization while practicing law. These experiences gave her a nuanced understanding of both the creative and administrative aspects of arts institutions. The arts aren't just about cultural enrichment. They're economic engines for communities across America, Crockett had noted during committee discussions. "We need policy based on evidence, not just emotion or celebrity endorsements." Despite her background, Crockett's assignment to the Arts Committee had been met with skepticism from some cultural commentators who questioned whether a freshman representative with a legal background could effectively address the complex challenges facing American cultural institutions. Several high-profile arts administrators had expressed concerns about her appointment, suggesting that more established representatives would better serve the interests of the creative community. The tension between Washington and Crockett had been building for weeks before the hearing. In a widely circulated interview, Washington had cited Crockett specifically when discussing concerns about the committee, stating that new representatives without arts backgrounds shouldn't be making decisions about cultural funding. This comment had generated significant media attention, with several arts publications citing it as evidence of growing frustration with congressional oversight of cultural programs. What Washington didn't know was that Crockett's staff had been methodically researching his previous statements on arts policy, identifying numerous contradictions between his past positions and his current testimony. They compiled these inconsistencies not to embarrass the acclaimed actor, but to highlight broader questions about celebrity influence on policy decisions. As the hearing began that morning, the room was filled with journalists, arts administrators, and citizens concerned about the future of federal arts funding. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, particularly after Washington's opening statement had directly questioned Crockett's qualifications to serve on the committee overseeing arts policy. "Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Washington," Chairman Roberts said, nodding toward the committee members. "We'll now begin questions, starting with Congresswoman Crockett." Crockett adjusted her microphone. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Washington, for appearing today. Your contributions to American culture are undeniable, and your foundation's work supporting arts education is commendable." Washington nodded with the practiced graciousness of someone accustomed to accolades. "Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd like to begin by addressing something you mentioned in your opening statement," Crockett continued. "You expressed concern about committee members who lack what you called substantive arts backgrounds making funding decisions. You specifically mentioned me as someone who might be, as you put it, unfit to evaluate arts programs due to my background. Is that an accurate summary of your position?" "Yes," Washington replied without hesitation. "With all due respect, Congresswoman, decisions about cultural funding should be informed by deep understanding of artistic practice and arts administration. For my research, your background is primarily in law and civil rights work. Admirable fields, but not directly relevant to arts policy." "I appreciate your candor," Crockett responded. "Before we continue, I'd like to clarify my own background briefly. While my recent work has indeed been in law, my undergraduate education included a minor in fine arts, and I served for 3 years as a managing director of the Third Ward Community Theater in Houston and later spent 5 years on the board of the Texas Regional Arts Council. Would you consider that experience relevant to arts policy discussions?" Washington shifted slightly, seemingly recalibrating. "That's more background than I was aware of. Certainly, though, I would still suggest that more extensive experience would be beneficial for someone in your position." "That's a fair perspective," Crockett acknowledged. "Experience matters in any field. Speaking of experience, in your testimony today, you advocated for what you called professional arts administrators rather than elected officials making funding decisions. You suggested that the NEA should operate with minimal congressional oversight because, in your words, politicians lack the expertise to evaluate artistic merit. Is that a position you consistently held?" "Yes," Washington replied confidently. "I've always believed that artistic decisions should be made by those with relevant expertise, not by political appointees or elected officials who may have limited understanding of artistic practice." Crockett nodded thoughtfully. "That's what made the recording I just played so surprising. In that interview from March of last year with Arts Today magazine, you took what appears to be the opposite position. You stated that the NEA should be completely eliminated because, as you put, unelected bureaucrats shouldn't decide what counts as valuable art in America." She displayed the magazine cover on the screen behind her. "Would you like to clarify which of these contradictory positions represent your actual view? Should arts funding decisions be made by arts professionals with minimal political oversight, as you stated today, or should the NEA be eliminated because unelected administrators shouldn't make these decisions as you stated last year?" A subtle shift occurred in Washington's demeanor. A tightening around the eyes. A slight straightening of his posture. "Context matters, Congresswoman. That interview was specifically discussing controversial grants that many Americans found objectionable." "I have the full transcript here," Crockett responded, holding up a document. "The question was broadly about NEA's structure and governance, not about specific grants. But let's move to another area. In your testimony today, you advocated for increasing the NEA budget to $500 million annually. Is that correct?" "Yes," Washington confirmed. "Current funding levels are inadequate to support American cultural development properly." Crockett nodded. "Yet, in this opinion piece you wrote for the Washington Post just 7 months ago, You argued that federal arts funding creates dependency that ultimately weakens cultural institutions, and that the NEA budget should be gradually reduced to encourage more sustainable private support models. The piece specifically recommended reducing the budget to $75 million, approximately half its current level. She displayed the article on the screen. Again, these positions seem directly contradictory. Could you help the committee understand which position reflects your actual view on appropriate funding levels? Washington's expression tightened further. My thinking has evolved based on new information about the impact of arts funding on underserved communities. That's understandable, Crockett replied. Positions can certainly evolve. When did this evolution occur? The Post article was published in November, and today is May. I don't recall the exact timing, Washington responded, a defensive edge entering his voice. But as someone who has worked directly with arts organizations for decades, I believe my current position is well informed. Your experience is indeed substantial, Crockett acknowledged, which makes another contradiction particularly puzzling. In your testimony today, you stated that local arts agencies are inefficient and should be bypassed in favor of direct federal grants to arts organizations. However, just 3 weeks ago at the National Local Arts Agencies Conference, you said, and I'll play the audio. She pressed a button and Washington's voice filled the room again. Local arts agencies are the lifeblood of American culture. Their understanding of community needs makes them the ideal channel for federal arts dollars. Bypassing them would be catastrophic for cultural equity. As the recording ended, a murmur spread through the hearing room. Crockett continued. These statements appeared to be directly contradictory. Which position represents your actual view on the role of local arts agencies? Washington's composure began to visibly fray. Congresswoman, these elected quotations remove important context and create the appearance of contradictions in nuanced positions. I provided complete sources for each quote, Crockett responded calmly. The full context is available in materials I submitted to the committee. But let's move to your critique of my qualifications specifically. In your opening statement, you suggested that my background makes me unfit to evaluate arts programs effectively. Yet, in this speech at Howard University last year, you stated that diverse perspectives, including those from outside traditional arts backgrounds, are essential to developing effective cultural policy. She displayed a transcript of the speech. You specifically said, "We need people with legal backgrounds, business experience, and community organizing history involved in arts policy because culture doesn't exist in isolation from these domains." This seems to describe my exact background: law, business administration, and community organizing. Has your position on the value of diverse perspectives in arts policy changed? The tension in the room was palpable as Washington struggled to reconcile these contradictions. Obviously, I support diverse perspectives, he said finally. My concern is specifically about decision-makers who might lack sufficient familiarity with artistic practice. I understand, Crockett replied. One final question about consistency. Today you testified that congressional oversight of the NEA threatens artistic freedom and should be minimized. However, in this testimony you gave before the Senate in 2019, you argued that stronger congressional oversight is needed because the NEA has become unresponsive to broader American values. She displayed both statements side by side on the screen. These positions seem fundamentally incompatible. Has your view on congressional oversight changed? And if so, why? Washington's frustration became increasingly evident. Congresswoman, these selected comparisons fail to capture the complexity of cultural policy. Different contexts require different approaches. I agree completely that context matters, Crockett responded. That's why I provided complete sources for every quote, including dates, publications, and full transcripts. The context are clearly established in the full materials submitted to the committee. The contradictions aren't created by my questions. They exist in your public statements and testimony. The dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a hearing featuring a beloved cultural icon delivering authoritative testimony had transformed into a methodical examination of consistency and credibility. The decisive moment came when Congresswoman Crockett displayed a final devastating comparison on the screen behind her. On the left side was Washington's statement from earlier in the hearing. Congresswoman Crockett lacks the fundamental understanding of arts funding that makes her unfit to determine the future of programs that nurture America's cultural heritage. On the right side was a quote from Washington's commencement address at Howard University just 11 months earlier. "We need more leaders like Jasmine Crockett who bring fresh perspectives to cultural policy." Her background managing community arts organizations while practicing law gives her exactly the interdisciplinary understanding that arts policy requires. A wave of reaction swept through the hearing room. Murmurs, a few audible gasps, and a furious typing of journalists capturing the moment. Washington stared at the screen, momentarily speechless, his usual eloquence nowhere to be found. "Mr. Washington," Crockett said, her voice remaining respectful despite the mounting evidence, "I don't doubt your commitment to the arts. Your foundation's work speaks for itself. What concerns me is that your testimony today contradicts not only your previous statements on nearly every substantive policy question, but even your specific assessment of my own qualifications." She organized her documents neatly. "These contradictions raise an important question for our committee. How should we evaluate testimony when it appears to be inconsistent, not just in details but in fundamental principles? When someone advocates for positions directly contrary to their previous statements without acknowledging or explaining the change, how much weight should we give to their current recommendations?" Washington attempted to recover his composure. "Congresswoman, public figures address different audiences and contexts. Apparent contradictions can result from these varying circumstances." "That's certainly true," Crockett acknowledged. "But the statements I presented aren't from decades apart or from radically different contexts. Most are from within the past year, all addressing the same basic policy questions about arts funding and governance. The audiences differ somewhat, but the topics are identical." She turned to address the committee directly. "What we're seeing illustrates a broader challenge in our policy discussions. When testimony is inconsistent, even for the most accomplished and well-intentioned witnesses, we must focus on evidence and outcomes rather than reputation or eloquence. Mr. Washington's achievements in his field are extraordinary, but contradictory positions don't become consistent simply because they're delivered with conviction by someone we admire." The committee chairman, recognizing the significance of the moment, asked, "Mr. Washington, would you like to address these apparent contradictions in your positions?" Washington's response revealed how thoroughly the dynamic had shifted. "I appreciate the Congresswoman's thorough research," he said, his voice noticeably less authoritative than at the beginning of the hearing. "I acknowledge that some of my positions have changed over time, perhaps more rapidly than I recognized. Cultural policy is complex, and my thinking continues to evolve as I engage with different perspectives." This carefully worded statement, essentially acknowledging inconsistency without directly addressing the contradictions, marked a dramatic retreat from his earlier definitive pronouncements. "Thank you for that acknowledgement," Crockett responded. "Evolution in thinking is natural and often valuable. My concern isn't that your positions have changed. It's that today's testimony presented those positions as long-standing principles rather than recent evolutions and specifically questioned others' qualifications based on criteria you yourself contradicted just months ago." She gathered her documents. "I believe we can have a more productive conversation about arts policy if we focus on evidence about program effectiveness rather than assertions about who is fit to participate in these decisions." As Crockett concluded her questioning, the impact was evident throughout the hearing room. What had begun as a typical congressional hearing featuring celebrity testimony had transformed into something far more substantive, a methodical examination of consistency and evidence that transcended star power. The chairman, visibly impressed by the exchange, turned to Washington. "Would you like to revise any portions of your testimony in light of this discussion?" Washington's response captured how completely the dynamic had shifted. "I would welcome the opportunity to submit a supplemental statement that more clearly articulates the evolution of my thinking on these issues," he said, his tone noticeably more measured than his earlier pronouncements. As the hearing proceeded to the next questioner, observers noted how thoroughly the narrative had changed. The story was no longer Hollywood legend advises Congress, but preparation overcomes celebrity as contradictions exposed. The repercussions of the exchange between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Denzel Washington extended far beyond the hearing room. By that evening, clips of the confrontation had spread across social media platforms, generating millions of views and extensive commentary. Major news outlets framed the story in ways that captured its significance. Washington's contradictions exposed in congressional testimony read the New York Times headline. NPR produced a segment titled Celebrity versus Consistency, when star power meets policy scrutiny. Even entertainment publications covered the exchange, with Variety noting, Washington's rare misstep highlights risks of celebrity policy advocacy. Political analysts highlighted the broader implications. What made this exchange so compelling wasn't just a celebrity factor, explained political commentator Michael Steele. It was watching someone methodically demonstrate that even the most respected voices should be held accountable for consistency in their positions. Congresswoman Crockett didn't attack Washington personally. She simply presented his own words and asked him to reconcile them. The confrontation sparked renewed interest in the role of celebrities in policy discussions. Opinion pages across the political spectrum published pieces questioning whether star power too often substitutes for substantive expertise in congressional hearings. Several publications conducted analyses of celebrity testimony over the past decade, finding numerous examples where contradictory positions had gone unchallenged because of a witness's prominence. For Washington, the professional consequences were significant but nuanced. His reputation as an actor remained undiminished, but his standing as a policy advocate took a notable hit. 3 scheduled appearances at policy forums were quietly postponed. His foundation issued a statement acknowledging that Mr. Washington's positions on arts funding have evolved over time and announcing the formation of an advisory committee to ensure consistency in our advocacy positions. 2 weeks after the hearing, Washington addressed the situation in an interview with 60 Minutes. I went into that hearing with the right intentions, but the wrong approach, he acknowledged. I've learned that effective advocacy requires consistency and humility. When I reviewed the evidence Congresswoman Crockett presented, I had to admit that my positions have been less consistent than they should have been. That's a valuable lesson for anyone entering the policy arena. This thoughtful response helped mitigate damage to his reputation, demonstrating the grace and self-awareness that had contributed to his respected status. Still, the incident served as a reminder that even the most accomplished individuals are not immune to scrutiny when they enter the policy domain. For Congresswoman Crockett, the aftermath brought a different kind of attention. Policy institutes invited her to speak about effective oversight techniques. Her methodical approach was highlighted in training sessions for congressional staff. Arts organizations that had initially questioned her appointment to the committee now recognized the depth of research and preparation she brought to her role. What makes Representative Crockett's approach so effective isn't just her knowledge of the subject matter, noted congressional scholar Jennifer Lawson. It's her understanding that policy discussions should be grounded in evidence rather than authority. Where other members might defer to celebrity witnesses, she evaluated the testimony on its merits and consistency. Perhaps most significantly, the confrontation influenced how subsequent congressional hearings with celebrity witnesses were conducted. Staff for several committees reported increased emphasis on researching witnesses' previous positions before hearings. Members from both parties began requesting more thorough preparation materials, focusing on consistency of testimony rather than just biographical information. The House Committee on Administration issued new guidance for committees hearing testimony from high-profile witnesses. Effective evaluation of testimony requires thorough research into witnesses' previous public positions on relevant issues. Staff should prepare members with comprehensive documentation of any significant evolutions or contradictions in these positions. Media coverage of the confrontation evolved from initial Hollywood star-challenged framing to more substantive analysis of celebrity influence in policy. Editorial boards across the political spectrum published pieces about the proper role of prominent cultural figures in shaping public policy, with several explicitly citing the Crockett-Washington exchange as a turning point in how such testimony should be evaluated. The public response revealed a sophisticated understanding of the issues at stake. Comment sections and social media discussions showed unusual depth, with citizens across political divides expressing appreciation for questioning based on substantive research rather than deference to celebrity. What resonated with viewers wasn't the gotcha aspect of questioning, explained media analyst Robert Chun. It was watching someone demonstrate that in a functioning democracy, even the most admired voices should be held to standards of consistency and evidence when they enter the policy arena. In her district office a month after the confrontation, Crockett reflected on its significance during an interview with her local newspaper. This was never about diminishing Mr. Washington's tremendous contributions to American culture, she explained. It was about ensuring that our policy discussions are grounded in consistent principles rather than shifting positions. She continued, "Celebrity can bring valuable attention to important issues, but that attention is only useful if it leads to substantive, evidence-based policy discussions. When we're making decisions that affect cultural institutions across America, we need to focus on what works, not who says it works." When asked if she had anticipated the viral nature of the exchange, Crockett smiled. "My focus was on establishing a clear factual record to inform our committee's work." The public response has been surprising but encouraging. It suggests that people are hungry for substance over celebrity in our policy discussions. The legacy of the confrontation continued to resonate in discussions about governance and accountability. Communications professor Sarah Jenkins perhaps captured its significance most succinctly. What we witnessed wasn't just a compelling political moment. It was a demonstration that in a healthy democracy, evidence and consistency should matter more than fame or eloquence, regardless of how much we might admire the messenger. For citizens watching at home, the confrontation offered something increasingly rare in public discourse. A moment where thorough preparation visibly overcame star power, where substance trumped celebrity, and where the strength of evidence proved more important than the strength of reputation. As one widely shared comment on the video observed, "I have enormous respect for Denzel Washington as an actor, but watching someone hold him accountable with his own words reminded me that democracy works best when we evaluate ideas based on their merit, not on who delivers them." If you found this analysis of accountability in public discourse valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of how our democratic institutions function in practice. Share your thoughts in the comments about the proper role of celebrities in policy discussions. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you content that matters.